Hello, we are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are discussing a topic that is often overlooked, the physical act of speaking. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through how to train your mouth to speak English naturally and fluently.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. Many of us know the grammar and the words in our heads, but when we open our mouths, our tongue feels heavy and the words don't come out right. Today, we want to talk about the gymnastics of English and how to make your mouth muscles work for you.
That word, gymnastics, is actually a perfect way to begin this conversation, Abel. Because when most people think about learning English, they think about vocabulary lists, grammar rules, and maybe watching movies or reading books. And those things are all important, but almost nobody thinks about the physical workout that speaking a language actually requires. Your mouth, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, your throat, all of these are muscle systems. And just like any other muscle in your body, they need to be trained.
That is such a different way to think about it. I always thought that if I just memorized enough words and studied enough grammar, the speaking would come naturally. But it did not work that way for me at all. I remember studying English for years, and I genuinely knew the words, but when I tried to have a conversation, I would freeze. The word was right there in my head, but my mouth just would not produce it correctly.
You are describing something that millions of language learners experience, and it has a very specific explanation. Your brain and your mouth are two different systems. Your brain can recognize a word, understand its meaning, and even know exactly how it should sound. All of this can happen in a fraction of a second. But speaking that word out loud requires a completely separate physical process. Your brain has to send a signal to your tongue, your lips, your jaw, and your breath, and all of those parts have to coordinate together at exactly the right moment. If those muscles have never practiced that specific movement before, the signal gets confused. The movement is slow, awkward, or simply wrong.
So it is almost like my brain was the coach, but my mouth was a player who had never been to practice.
That is an excellent analogy. Exactly right. Think about learning to play the piano. When a beginner sits down at the piano, they might be able to read the sheet music perfectly. They understand that this note goes here and that note goes there. But their fingers have never done these movements before. So when they try to play, the music comes out slow, uneven, and full of mistakes. Not because they do not understand the music, but because their fingers have not been trained yet. Speaking English as a second language is identical to this. The knowledge is in your head, but the skill lives in your muscles. And skills are only built through repetition, through consistent physical practice, not through more studying.
And I think this is something that nobody told me when I was learning. My teachers always said, study more, read more, listen more. And those are good things, but nobody ever said, open your mouth and physically practice making these sounds for 30 minutes every day. Nobody said to treat it like going to the gym.
And that is a fundamental gap in how language is often taught. We spend enormous amounts of time on the passive side of language, listening, reading, studying, and we spend very little time on the active, physical production side. Now, I want to be very clear. The passive side is important. You need input. You need to hear the language and read the language. But if you want to speak fluently, you have to balance that with active, physical, vocal production. You have to move your mouth. You have to make sounds. You have to do this every single day.
Okay, so let us go deeper into this idea of muscle memory. I've heard this term before in sports and music, but can you explain what it actually means and how it applies to speaking English?
Muscle memory is one of the most fascinating concepts in all of human physiology, and it absolutely applies to speech. Here's what happens in your body. When you perform a physical movement for the very first time, your brain has to work very hard to coordinate that movement. It's a conscious, effortful process. You're thinking about every step. But when you repeat that exact same movement many times, dozens of times, hundreds of times, something remarkable happens in your brain. The movement pathway becomes what we call myelinated. A protective coating forms around the nerve pathway, and this makes the signal travel faster, much, much faster. What was once a slow, conscious, effortful movement becomes a fast, automatic, unconscious movement. That's muscle memory.
So it is literally a physical change in the brain.
Absolutely. It's a neurological change. Your brain physically rewires itself to make repeated actions more efficient. This is why a professional pianist can play thousands of notes per minute without consciously thinking about where each finger goes. Their fingers have made those movements so many times that the movements have become completely automatic. And this is exactly what happens in fluent speech. When a native English speaker says the word thought, they don't consciously think about pulling their tongue back, raising the back of the tongue, rounding their lips slightly, and producing a soft, low vowel sound. They just say the word. The movement is automatic because they have made that movement many thousands of times throughout their entire lives.
But for me, every time I try to say the word thought, I have to think about it. And while I'm thinking about the sounds, I've already lost the conversation.
That's the precise problem that muscle memory training solves. Right now, when you speak English, you're using conscious processing for movements that should be unconscious. That uses up brain space and time that you need for the actual content of the conversation, for thinking about what you want to say next, for understanding what the other person is saying, for choosing the right vocabulary. When your mouth movements are still in the conscious stage, you simply can't do all of those things at once. And the result is that you freeze, you hesitate, or you speak very slowly and carefully. The goal of physical speech training is to move those mouth movements from the conscious level down to the automatic subconscious level, and the only way to do that is repetition.
So how many times do you actually need to repeat something before it becomes muscle memory?
Research on motor learning, which is the scientific field that studies how humans learn physical movements, suggests that truly automatizing a movement can take anywhere from several hundred to several thousand repetitions, depending on the complexity of the movement and the individual learner. For something as complex as the sounds of a foreign language, we're generally talking about consistent daily practice over many weeks or months. But here's the encouraging part. You don't have to wait until you reach the 1,000 repetition mark before you start to feel improvement. Many learners begin to notice that certain sounds feel easier and more natural within just a few weeks of daily practice. The brain is remarkably adaptable. It starts optimizing the pathway from your very first repetition.
That is actually very encouraging. I think a lot of learners, including myself, give up too soon because the progress feels invisible in the beginning.
You have identified something very important. The progress in physical speech training is often invisible for a while, and then it suddenly becomes very visible. It's like pushing a heavy rock up a hill. For a long time, you're pushing, and the rock barely seems to move. And then suddenly, you reach the top, and the rock rolls effortlessly on its own. The consistency during those early weeks when you can't yet feel the progress is absolutely critical. That's when the neurological rewiring is happening. That's when the myelin is forming. You just can't feel it yet.
Now I want to ask about a technique I've heard you mention before, shadowing. Can you explain what shadowing is and why it is so effective for building this kind of physical fluency?
Shadowing is one of my absolute favorite techniques for speech training, and I believe it is one of the most powerful tools available to any language learner at any level. Here's how it works. You find a recording of a native speaker. It could be a podcast, a YouTube video, an audiobook, a movie clip, and you listen to it while simultaneously repeating what you hear as closely and as quickly as possible, like a shadow. You are not waiting for the speaker to finish a sentence and then repeating it. You are speaking at the same time as the speaker, just slightly behind them, following their every word, their every rhythm, their every rise and fall of intonation.
That sounds incredibly difficult to do.
It is challenging at first, and that is actually part of what makes it so effective. When you shadow, you are forced to pay attention to things that you would normally ignore when you just listen passively. You are listening for the exact rhythm of the sentence. You are feeling how the speaker connects one word to the next. You are noticing where the speaker pauses and where the speaker speeds up. And crucially, you are physically producing all of these patterns with your own mouth, your own tongue, and your own voice. You are not just hearing native speech, you are embodying it.
I tried something like this once. I was watching a slow English podcast and I tried to repeat along, but I found that I was always a bit behind and sometimes I could not catch every word, and it became very frustrating.
That frustration is completely normal, and it is actually a sign that you are pushing your limits, which is exactly what you want to do. But there is a practical approach to make shadowing feel less overwhelming. When you first start, choose material that is slightly below your comfort level in terms of vocabulary complexity. You want to be able to understand almost all of the content, because if you are also struggling with unknown vocabulary at the same time, it becomes too many challenges at once. Start with slow, clear speech. This podcast, for example, is a good starting point for many learners. Then, as your shadowing muscles develop, you can gradually move to faster, more natural, more colloquial speech.
And what specifically does shadowing train? I mean, beyond just pronunciation.
Shadowing trains several different things simultaneously, which is why it is so efficient. First, it trains your rhythm. English has a very specific rhythmic pattern called stress-timed rhythm. This means that in English, the stressed syllables in a sentence tend to come at roughly regular time intervals, and the unstressed syllables are squeezed in between them. This is very different from syllable-timed languages, where every syllable takes roughly the same amount of time. When you shadow a native speaker, you are physically practicing this rhythm with your breath and your speech muscles. Second, shadowing trains your intonation, the music of the language, the way your voice rises and falls to express meaning and emotion. Third, it trains connected speech, the way words link together and blend in natural, flowing conversation. Native speakers do not say each word separately with a little pause between each one. They connect words into smooth streams of sound.
Can you give me an example of connected speech? Because I think this is something that really confuses me when I am listening to native speakers. I sometimes cannot tell where one word ends and another begins.
Yes, this is one of the biggest challenges for English learners, and it is entirely a physical acoustic phenomenon. Let me give you a classic example. The phrase a lot of in natural fast speech does not sound like three separate words. It sounds something like a lotta. The words are linked and compressed together. Or consider the phrase did you. In very natural speech, this becomes something closer to didja. The letter combination merges and changes. Or going to becomes gonna in casual speech. These are not mistakes. These are the natural results of the physics of connected speech. When you speak quickly and fluidly, your mouth is always preparing the next sound before the current one is finished, and this preparation causes the sounds to blend together. When you shadow native speakers, you are training your mouth to make these blending movements automatically.
That is fascinating. So native speakers are not even fully pronouncing every sound in every word?
Correct. Fully articulating every single phoneme in every single word actually sounds unnatural and robotic in English. Think about how a GPS navigation voice used to sound. Very precise, very separate, very mechanical. It sounded artificial because it was too clear. Real human speech is more fluid. Sounds influence each other. Vowels shorten and lengthen. Consonants soften or strengthen depending on what comes before and after them. This is called co-articulation, and it is a natural feature of all spoken human languages. When you learn to shadow, you are learning to co-articulate naturally in English, and this is what gives your speech that smooth, flowing quality.
I want to talk about something very specific now, vowels and consonants, because I think this is where a lot of the physical difficulty comes from. The shapes your mouth makes in English are just different from other languages.
This is absolutely true, and it is one of the most underappreciated aspects of learning to speak a new language. Every language has what linguists call a phonological inventory, a specific set of sounds that language uses. The vowels and consonants of English are not universal. They are specific to English, and some of them simply don't exist in other languages. This means that if you are a speaker of, say, Spanish or Mandarin or Arabic or French, your mouth has been trained from childhood to make the specific sounds of your native language. Those movements are deeply automatic in your mouth, but some English sounds require completely different movements, and your mouth has never made those movements before.
I think the th sound is the most famous example of this. Almost every learner I know struggles with the th sound.
The th is a perfect example, and it's worth describing in detail because the physical description is so important. In English, we have two th sounds. We have the voiceless th, as in the word think or three, and we have the voiced th, as in the word the or this. Both of these sounds require a very specific tongue position that does not exist in most other languages. You have to place the tip of your tongue, just the very tip, gently between your upper and lower front teeth, or just behind them, and then push air through that narrow gap. For the voiceless th, you push air without any vibration in your vocal cords. For the voiced th, your vocal cords are vibrating while you push air through the gap. Many learners substitute a T or a D sound for the th because those sounds are made in roughly the same area of the mouth but without the tongue tip between the teeth. Others substitute an F or V sound. These substitutions are natural. Your mouth is defaulting to the closest movement it already knows.
And I have to be honest, I still do this sometimes. When I'm tired or speaking quickly, I'll say day instead of the without even realizing it.
Which is exactly why we talk about muscle memory. When you are tired, your brain defaults even more heavily to automatic, well-practiced movements. If the correct TH movement is not yet fully automatic for you, your brain will substitute the automatic movement it does have, which is the D sound. This is not a failure of intelligence or effort. It is simply a question of which neural pathway is stronger at that moment. The only way to make the correct TH pathway stronger is to practice it deliberately and consciously many, many times until it eventually becomes the automatic response.
What about vowels? I feel like English has so many vowel sounds, and they are sometimes very hard to distinguish.
English is actually quite extraordinary in its vowel richness. Depending on the variety of English you are studying, American, British, Australian, there can be anywhere from 12 to 15 distinct vowel sounds, plus several diphthongs, which are vowels that move from one position to another within a single syllable. Compare this to a language like Spanish, which has only 5 pure vowel sounds, and you can immediately see why English vowels are challenging for Spanish speakers. Many of these vowel sounds require very precise mouth shapes and tongue positions. Let me describe a few. The vowel sound in the word cat, as in the flat, wide a, requires you to open your jaw quite wide and spread your lips sideways, almost like a flat smile, while keeping your tongue very low and flat in your mouth. This is a very different position from the similar sounding vowel in cup, where your jaw is still open, but your lips are more neutral and your tongue is slightly higher and further back. Or consider the vowel in good versus the vowel in food. Both involve rounded lips, but in good, your lips are only slightly rounded and the vowel is shorter, while in food, your lips are more tightly rounded and pushed slightly forward, almost like you are making a small circle with your lips.
I never thought about it in such physical terms before. When I learned vowels in school, it was always about hearing the difference. But you're describing what your face and tongue and lips are actually doing.
And that physical description is what makes the difference between a learner who can hear the difference and a learner who can produce the difference. Hearing is passive, production is physical. You need both. The journey usually goes like this. First, you learn to hear the distinction between two sounds your ear develops before your mouth does. Then you need to consciously learn the physical position required to produce each sound, and then you need to repeat that physical position until it becomes automatic. Many English courses spend a lot of time on the listening and almost no time on the precise physical description of how to position your mouth. We are addressing that gap today.
I want to move to something you mentioned briefly earlier, the importance of practicing slowly before you can speak quickly. Can you expand on that? Because I think many learners believe that practicing slowly means they will always sound slow.
This is one of the most important points in all of speech training, and the misunderstanding you describe is very common. Let me explain the principle clearly. When you are building a new motor skill, any new motor skill, accuracy must come before speed. Always. This is true for musicians, athletes, surgeons, and language speakers. If you try to play a difficult piano passage at full speed before you can play it at slow speed accurately, you will make errors. And here's the critical problem. If you repeat those errors many times, you are not building the correct movement pattern. You are building an incorrect movement pattern. You are creating muscle memory for the wrong thing.
So practicing fast with mistakes actually makes things worse.
In the long run, yes, you are reinforcing incorrect movements. There's a saying among music teachers, practice makes permanent, not perfect. Speed comes naturally as accuracy improves. Here's what actually happens physiologically. When you practice a movement slowly and correctly, your brain builds the neural pathway for that correct movement with great precision. At slow speed, you have time to ensure every element of the movement is exactly right. The tongue position, the lip shape, the breath support, the voicing. Once that pathway is built precisely and accurately, speed is simply a matter of reducing the time between the movements. The pathway is already there. The muscle memory for the correct movement is already there. You are just running through it faster. But if the pathway was built incorrectly, if you practiced at full speed and got sloppy with your tongue position, then running through it faster just makes the incorrect movement faster.
So practicing fast with mistakes actually makes things worse.
In the long run, yes, you are reinforcing incorrect movements. There's a saying among music teachers, practice makes permanent, not perfect. Speed comes naturally as accuracy improves. Here's what actually happens physiologically. When you practice a movement slowly and correctly, your brain builds the neural pathway for that correct movement with great precision. At slow speed, you have time to ensure every element of the movement is exactly right. The tongue position, the lip shape, the breath support, the voicing. Once that pathway is built precisely and accurately, speed is simply a matter of reducing the time between the movements. The pathway is already there. The muscle memory for the correct movement is already there. You are just running through it faster. But if the pathway was built incorrectly, if you practiced at full speed and got sloppy with your tongue position, then running through it faster just makes the incorrect movement faster.
This actually explains something I experienced. I had a friend who could speak English very quickly, but I often could not understand him. And I thought that speaking quickly was the same as speaking fluently, but maybe it is not.
You have made a very astute observation. Speed without clarity is not fluency. True fluency is the ability to produce clear, natural, accurate speech at a comfortable conversational pace. And comfortable conversational pace is actually not as fast as many learners think. Even native speakers slow down when they want to be clearly understood. They speed up when they are comfortable and relaxed with a close friend. Real fluency is having the full range, the ability to go from slow and clear to fast and casual, and to have it all be accurate and understandable. The path to that full range begins with slow and precise practice. When you practice slowly and correctly, you are building the foundation that will eventually support natural speed.
Now, I want to ask about reading aloud. You mentioned that reading aloud is much more effective than reading silently for developing fluency. I find this very interesting because, in my experience, most people read silently.
Reading aloud is one of the most powerful and most neglected fluency tools available to language learners. And you are right, most adult learners read silently almost all of the time. But silent reading, while wonderful for vocabulary and comprehension, does absolutely nothing for your mouth muscles. When you read silently, your eyes process the words, your brain processes the meaning, and the activity stays entirely inside your head. Your tongue does not move, your lips do not move, your throat does not vibrate. None of the physical machinery of speech is activated, so silent reading does not contribute to building the muscle memory for speech.
But reading aloud does?
Reading aloud does everything that silent reading does, and then it adds the entire physical dimension. When you read aloud, your brain is processing the meaning, yes, but simultaneously, your tongue, lips, jaw, and vocal cords are producing the sounds. You are building mouth muscle memory in real time. And here is what makes reading aloud especially valuable. It allows you to practice physical speech production without the cognitive pressure of also having to think about what you want to say. In a real conversation, you are managing two enormous tasks at once, thinking about content and physically producing speech. When you read aloud, the content is already there on the page. You only have to focus on the physical production. This means you can put 100% of your attention on your pronunciation, your rhythm, your intonation, and your mouth movements. It is a perfect training ground.
How long should someone read aloud each day to notice a real difference?
Consistency matters more than duration, especially in the beginning. I generally recommend that learners start with at least 15 to 20 minutes of deliberate, focused reading aloud every single day. I emphasize every single day because the brain builds and maintains those neural pathways through regular use. If you practice for 2 hours on Saturday and then do nothing until the following Saturday, the reinforcement is much weaker than if you practice for 20 minutes every single day. The daily repetition signals to your brain that this is a pathway worth maintaining and strengthening. Over time, as the habit becomes natural, you can extend to 30 minutes or more.
And does the material matter? Should we read specific kinds of texts?
The material does matter, particularly in the beginning. For speech training purposes, dialogue-heavy texts are especially useful. Things like scripts, screenplays, short stories with lots of conversation, or transcripts of podcasts. Dialogue reflects the rhythm and vocabulary of real spoken English, and it gives you practice with the kinds of sentences that actually come up in conversations. Academic texts, while excellent for vocabulary and comprehension, tend to have very long, complex sentences that do not reflect the shorter, more spontaneous structure of conversational speech. As you become more confident with reading aloud, you can expand to more varied texts. Poetry is also a wonderful tool because it draws your attention very deliberately to rhythm and the musicality of language. Even nursery rhymes and simple poems are excellent for training the rhythmic feel of English.
I want to address something that I think is a real barrier for many learners, the feeling of looking silly. When you describe these mouth movements, the wide open jaw, the tongue between the teeth, I think many people feel self-conscious about making those movements, especially in front of others.
This is such an important point to address honestly and with real empathy, because the fear of looking silly is genuinely one of the biggest obstacles to effective speech training, and it makes perfect sense that this fear exists. In many cultures, exaggerating your mouth movements or making unusual sounds feels socially inappropriate or childish. We are taught from a very young age to speak quietly and correctly and not to make strange faces. But here is the truth about English articulation. The language genuinely requires certain mouth movements that may feel quite large and exaggerated, especially compared to your native language. The wide, flat jaw opening for the a in cat, the lip rounding and protrusion for the oo in food, the tongue placement between the teeth for the. These are not optional stylistic choices. They are necessary for clear, accurate English production. If you suppress these movements because you feel self-conscious, your speech will be unclear.
So the exaggerated movements are not just for practice, they are actually part of how English sounds, correct?
Exactly. I want you to think about actors. When an actor is performing on stage in a large theater, they exaggerate their facial expressions and their voice projection so that the audience in the back of the theater can see and hear them clearly. Now, when that same actor is filming a close-up scene for a movie, they bring the expression down because the camera is right in front of them. But the underlying training, the ability to move their face and voice with full range, that is what gives them the power to calibrate. For English learners, especially in the early stages of physical speech training, practicing with slightly exaggerated mouth movements is the equivalent of stage acting training. You are building the full range of motion. You are teaching your muscles what the extremes feel like. Later, in natural conversation, your speech will naturally calibrate to a slightly more moderate version of those movements, but the sounds will still be clear because the muscle knows the full range.
And how do you recommend people deal with that self-consciousness in a practical way?
I have a few very practical recommendations. First, and most importantly, do your early physical speech practice alone. Close your bedroom door, sit in your car, use headphones and a mirror. Remove the audience. When you do not have to worry about being observed, you are free to make whatever enormous mouth movements you need to make without any social pressure. A mirror is actually an incredible tool. Watching your own mouth movements in the mirror while you practice allows you to see whether your tongue is in the right position, whether your lips are forming the right shape. It's like having a physical coach giving you visual feedback in real time. Second, I encourage learners to think of this practice time as their training session, just like an athlete's private practice. An athlete does not feel silly doing drills alone in the gym. They know that the drills are what build the ability to perform in public. Your private mouth movement practice is your drill.
That reframing is really helpful. Think of yourself as an athlete in training, not as someone making a fool of themselves.
Precisely. And I want to add one more thing about self-consciousness. In real conversations with native English speakers, I can tell you from experience that the person you are speaking with is far more focused on understanding your meaning than on judging the exact shape of your mouth. People are genuinely not as critical of our language learners as we fear they are. Most native English speakers deeply appreciate the effort that goes into learning another language. What they appreciate even more than perfect pronunciation is confident, clear, engaged communication. And that confidence comes from physical training. When your mouth has practiced the movements enough times that they feel natural to you, your body language becomes relaxed, your speech rhythm becomes more natural, and the overall impression of fluency improves dramatically, regardless of whether every single sound is perfect.
I think that is so important. Confidence actually changes how people perceive your speaking ability. I have noticed that when I speak with confidence, people understand me better, even if my pronunciation is not perfect.
That is a beautiful and accurate observation. Confidence affects your physical production of speech in very direct ways. When you're nervous, your muscles tighten, your throat tightens, your tongue becomes stiff, your breath becomes shallow. All of these physical changes make it harder to produce clear speech. When you're confident and relaxed, your muscles are loose, your breath is full and supported, and your tongue can move freely and accurately. This is another reason why physical speech training is so valuable. The more you practice, the more comfortable and natural the movements feel, and the more your overall confidence increases, creating a positive cycle.
Let me ask about something we haven't addressed yet. Warm-ups. Do you recommend that people warm up their mouth before practicing?
Yes, absolutely. And this is another area where the sports and music analogy is very relevant. No professional athlete begins intense training without warming up their muscles first. No professional singer begins a vocal performance without warming up their voice. And similarly, for serious speech training practice sessions, a brief physical warm-up can genuinely improve the quality of your practice. It increases blood flow to the small muscles of the face and mouth, and it increases your awareness of those muscles, which makes it easier to consciously control them during practice.
What kind of warm-up exercises do you recommend specifically?
I have several favorites. The first is a simple but very effective jaw stretching exercise. You slowly open your mouth as wide as is comfortable, hold it open for a few seconds, and then slowly close it. Repeat this 5 or 6 times. This gently stretches the jaw muscles and reminds your body to keep the jaw relaxed and mobile during speech. A tense, tight jaw is one of the most common physical causes of unclear speech. The second warm-up involves your lips. Press your lips together firmly and then pop them apart with a small burst of breath, like saying a very soft P sound. Then stretch your lips into a wide smile and then push them forward into a small round O shape, alternating back and forth. This activates the orbicularis oris, the circular muscle that surrounds your lips, which is absolutely central to producing many English sounds. The third warm-up involves the tongue. Press the tip of your tongue firmly against the back of your upper front teeth, and then slowly move the tongue tip back along the roof of your mouth as far as it can comfortably reach, and then bring it forward again. Repeat this several times. This stretches and activates the tongue muscles and increases your proprioceptive awareness of where your tongue is in your mouth, which is essential for precise consonant placement.
Proprioceptive. Can you explain that word?
Proprioception is your body's sense of its own position and movement. It's the sense that allows you to touch your nose with your eyes closed. You feel where your hand is without looking. For speech, proprioception is your sense of where your tongue, lips, and jaw are positioned inside your mouth without looking. Many people have relatively low proprioceptive awareness of their speech organs. They are not very conscious of exactly where their tongue is at any given moment. Physical warm-up exercises and deliberate, slow practice help to develop this awareness, and when your proprioceptive awareness improves, you gain much more precise, conscious control over your mouth movements, which directly improves your pronunciation accuracy.
That's incredible. It's like developing a sixth sense for your own mouth.
A perfect description. And as that sixth sense develops through consistent practice, you will begin to notice something wonderful happening. You'll start to feel when a sound is wrong before you even finish saying it. You will feel that your tongue was in the wrong position, or that your lips were not rounded enough, and you will be able to self-correct. That level of self-awareness is a sign that your physical speech training is working. You are developing the internal monitoring system that native speakers use automatically.
I also want to ask, how does all of this physical training connect to the larger goal of easy, natural conversation in daily life? Because everything we've talked about today sounds like quite intense, deliberate practice, but real conversation is spontaneous and unpredictable.
This is the beautiful synthesis of everything we have discussed today, and it is worth explaining very carefully. The deliberate, careful, structured physical practice that we have been describing, the shadowing, the reading aloud, the warm-up exercises, the slow and precise repetition of individual sounds, all of this takes place outside of real conversation. It is preparation. It is training. Just like a musician practices scales and exercises alone in a practice room, not in front of an audience, the scales and exercises are not the music, but they build the technical foundation that makes the music possible. Your deliberate speech training is the same. You are building the physical foundation, the muscle memory, the articulate mouth movements, the rhythm patterns, the connected speech habits, so that when you enter a real conversation, those things are automatic.
So the training frees up your brain during the actual conversation.
Exactly. Every mouth movement that becomes automatic through training is one less thing that your conscious brain has to manage during a conversation. And when your brain is not struggling to coordinate the physical movements of speech, it is free to do the things that make conversation rich and engaging, to listen carefully to the other person, to think about what you want to say, to choose your words thoughtfully, to laugh, to empathize, to connect. Language is ultimately about human connection. The physical training is simply the bridge that allows you to connect without physical barriers getting in the way.
That is beautifully said, and I think it reframes the whole journey. It's not just about sounding good, it's about being free to actually communicate.
Precisely. And I want to encourage every listener who is on this journey to be patient and compassionate with themselves. The physical dimension of language learning takes time. It is real, honest effort. Some sounds will come quickly, others will take weeks or months. There will be days when you feel like you are making progress and days when you feel like you have gone backward. This is completely normal in any motor learning process. The brain consolidates learning during rest, which is why you sometimes wake up and find that something that was difficult yesterday feels easier today. Trust the process, trust the repetition, trust your brain's remarkable capacity to adapt and to learn.
I love that. Trust the process. And I think the key takeaway for me personally from today's conversation is that speaking English is genuinely a physical skill. It's not just a mental exercise. My mouth needs to go to the gym just as much as my brain needs to study.
And that is the simplest and most powerful summary of everything we have explored today. The gap between knowing English and speaking English is not filled by studying more vocabulary lists or memorizing more grammar rules. That gap is filled by training your mouth, by making the conscious, deliberate, consistent physical practice of moving your tongue, your lips, your jaw, and your voice in the precise ways that English requires, until those movements become as natural and automatic as breathing. That is when English stops being a language you translate in your head and starts being a language you simply speak freely and fluently from your whole body.
Training your mouth is truly the bridge between knowing English and living in English, and every single repetition you make in your private practice room brings you one step closer to the natural, easy, confident conversation that you deserve.